Frank Hermann is a longtime EAH member and has worked on the development of airports in Hawaii and the Pacific for over 50 years. Frank's talk was recorded in two parts. In part one, Frank talks about airports in Hawaii. Frank arrived in Hawaii in 1966 to review the siting for the planned new airport for Kona on the Big Island. He then worked with Owen Miyamoto, another longtime EAH member, on the Honolulu New Reef runway and other projects. Frank credits Owen's forward-looking airport design goals that prepared Honolulu's airport for the new generation of jumbo jets, starting with the Boeing 747. Frank concludes part one on Hawaii airports at Kauai's Lahui Airport and its second runway. In part two, Frank covers the development of airports in Majuro Atoll, Kosrae Island, Pohnpei, Chuuk, and Guam. Frank finishes with talking about developing airports in Saipan, Yap, Palau, Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and Taipei, Taiwan.
Okay, now we're going to go across the Pacific. Airports I worked on out through there. One doesn't show on here. This is the Continental Air Micronesia, now United Airlines route across the Pacific. It used to stop every flight at Johnston Island. I believe it may not stop there at all or just stops one day a week. I'm not sure. But with Majuro, Kwajalein, Kosrae, Pohnpei, Chuuk, and Guam. This was the areas that we're going to talk about first, the routes that we went out through there. First islands I worked at were Marshall Islands. This was right after I got to, literally probably within the first several months after I got to FAA in 66, 67. The Corps of Engineers was challenged to build a runway on Marshall Islands because they needed that on the way out to Kwajalein. They had proposed building out on the reef. Probably this might be the area, it might not, but this is what actually did get built. I took what little data they had, and what we found is we could go out about this far from where they said we had to put the armor for the ocean, set the ocean side of it. This was the 500-foot wide safety area we had to have for the FAA criteria, like international criteria. So we were able to build that, a service road around it. There was enough area before this inner lagoon dropped off too steep where we could squeeze in a terminal, which I helped design the layouts of it and everything. And it got built. One of the things, they need water, they need it desperately. So it was designed as a water catchment with pumps and a reservoir so that the water that came in here could be pumped out over here to the reservoir and used for the community. The water on this side had to be effectively, the initial part of it had to be dumped because all of the soot spray would make the first part not usable, but when it got usable, after a heavy enough storm, or if it was, they could use that too. But most of their catchment they got from this side. And this is not a good photograph, but again, when they built the fire station, they took the basic idea, built the fire station out here, and then took the road around the fire station so that it could direct access onto the runway without any interference. And so that did that one. The next airport that I got, well, not the next, but the next one en route is Kosrae, which I was never really involved in the early planning. Did get in on just before the Corps of Engineers approved, the Navy, which was handling the construction there. The Navy approved the construction. I did get a chance to review and I saw nothing really significant about it. While it was under construction, our firm had a contract with the Navy on another airport out there. So they hired me on one of these weird contracts that nobody knows about because I had been in on the design of the reef runway shore protection to redesign the shore protection to use the side rocks they could get. They could not get the rocks big enough that the engineer in their original design had thought they needed and did need if they were going to build it that way. So I redesigned that. Then several years later, I got taken back to build security fences, perimeter roads, redo the lighting, and rebuilt the entire runway and apron asphalt portions and rebuilt even the concrete portions to bring them up to the new heavier aircraft. This had not been, and not again, this is not a negative comment on the engineer who did the design. He did a heck of a good design. He was just told to design for a plane that was way too light for the planes that were using it by the 1990s, were far, far, far heavier than he had been told we're going to use it. So it was, I emphasize that I'm not meaning there was anything wrong with his design. There wasn't. It's just that it needed more strength than it had.
Frank, how do you get on that island?
There is a bridge right here, which was structurally unsound, which every truck that went across it had to be watched to make sure it didn't fall through or didn't go too late. That was a job that should have been built while we were doing our work. It was a nightmare. But yes, that's how you get onto the main island. This is the main island. And by the way, obviously electricity ain't cheap out there. And the hotel we stayed at, we became friends with the owners, who are Australian, who loved living on the island. And several years after I had finished this job, I got a letter from the people at the hotel. Electric rates have gone up again. It is getting ridiculous. We have an opportunity to put solar on the roof of the hotel. Would you like to contribute? And if you'll contribute $150, you can have a free night in the hotel if you ever come out there, and a free meal if you give another $150. So I've got 2 free meals and 2 nights in the hotel if I never want to come out there, I guess, because I really felt on their side to help them. And they did build it. And the last I heard, it was functioning pretty good. Yes, electricity, expensive. Solar energy is the way to go out there, really is. And to their credit, it wasn't cheap, but they were able to do it. So, and be fun. I should one of these days go out there just to see if it is still working. At any rate, my next, and actually this was one of the first airports I did out there. In fact, I guess it was the first airport out there. Pohnpei was one of the major items when the Japanese had the island. They had a fantastic agricultural college that they opened up right after World War I, and had done a tremendous amount of work. And to the United States' discredit, we just closed the college essentially. And unfortunately, much of what they had done got lost in the events. But again, after World War II, we weren't exactly happy about the Japanese, immediately after. At any rate, it was a major island still in the Micronesian island group, and landing in the ocean out here or in the lagoons is the best way to go. So Pan Am wanted a land runway. And so I was given whatever maps they could send me, which wasn't much. And what I kind of figured out, the best place, given all of them, you can have a look around here, where do you go, and what you have to know what's in this area to know why you don't want to go there and so on. The final decision was probably the best place where they had or could get the land and could build a terminal. They would have to build a road, unfill, and bridge structures into the mainland, which is what you can see they built here. They built the terminal and so on. But my role in here was to plan where to build this, how to build it on this island. And as I say, I was still with the FAA at this time, so it had to be strictly, what I could unofficially draw on the paper, because I couldn't officially do it. I officially laid out the apron, which in hindsight, I should have laid out differently, but didn't. The terminal buildings, the original buildings, were, once again, pretty much my layout and design. This was an island which got tornadoes, or typhoons, I mean. The FAA approved windsock, which FAA said we would have to use, and which the Corps of Engineers would have used if they were going to be the one that built it. I don't know who managed the construction of it. But anyway, who was going to build it would have to figure some way to design a windsock that could withstand typhoons. And so, given nothing else, and knowing, and what I didn't know, but I in contact with the guys at that made the windsock antenna poles, or the what am I saying? Not windsock, the rotating beacon. poles, 51 feet or something, whatever they are above the ground, and they're heavy. So I took what they gave me and what I could figure out and what I could get somebody else to help me and work with them to design braces on the rotating beacon pole so that we could brace it for the typhoons. And that, as far as I know, is still there. And when you get off the plane and you look over to the side at the rotating beacon, you will probably still see I tried to find pictures of it and I couldn't, unfortunately, but you'll see the guy wires are still on it. And we used the same design then for all the other beacons we built out there for the typhoon loads. So at any rate, this is Schuylkill Rock. This, in a way, to you and I, if you're not a pilot, looks perfectly, what the heck's the problem? But as a pilot, that's pretty scary. You're coming in out here. This thing looks a lot closer than it really is. And so it does, in not the best of weather, it does give them a little bit of concern. It is safe. It meets all FAA criteria as published, recognizing that it exists and meets it. At any rate, this is a look from behind Schuylkill Rock. This is a more recent, a few years ago, and I don't think it's maybe more than 10 or 15 years ago, they extended the runway another, I think, 500 feet or so. They were trying to get direct flights from Tokyo or Japan or something like that down here. And they even had somebody that was interested in doing it. So they convinced the island to extend the runway. To the best of my knowledge, it worked for a few times and then didn't really pan out for a lot of reasons. And the island really is not of an island size with a population, with a tourist development that is set up to bring down airplane loads of passengers every few days or something. The apron is still here. They built a fire station here, which I violently objected to because this is where I wanted them to build a parallel taxiway if they ever needed it. So now they've fixed it so without building a new fire station, they won't be able to build a parallel taxiway. But that was their decision. I can't argue with that. They did put it as close to the runway as they could and still meet FAA clearance criteria. But that's, let's say, Pohnpei, a really fabulous island. My major work was on Moan Island in Chuuk. Basically, we built this runway. There was a Japanese coral, quote unquote, runway that kind of went from about here to about here. That was supposed to be 52 or 53 feet, 100 feet long. That wasn't. But don't tell, we didn't tell Air, actually we did, but we didn't officially tell Air Micronesia that. It was about 200 feet shorter. We got the topography. This corner of the runway is in water 100 feet deep. There was a rock quarry here, so we knew what we could get in armor. And so we designed the armor on here for this end. We went offshore on this end. We got 6,000 foot runway. That's plus 200 foot of overrun. This end is in about 35 feet. It drops to about 45 feet going forward. And after about 300 to 700 feet comes up to about minus 25 to 30. So it could be extended. But we were able to build it, get it built. I did all the design, all of the planning, laid out all the terminals that ended up getting built. Our company did, of course, and spent many, many days and weeks building and actually partially rebuilding this runway. This is your approach coming in over the water to this end of the runway. We used dolos, the same dolos on here that we used at Honolulu Airport. This was a design consideration. Yeah. Notice here this grass or green. Originally, we were just going to build, and the underlayer here is heavy rock. The dolos are on top of the heavy rock. That was going to be the end of it. If you go and look at my design, that's not the end of it. There is some cloth, the fabric cloth that starts right behind the dolos, is anchored down with rocks, goes over the rocks, comes down here, and is anchored out under the coral. It has coral on top of it, and we planted it. Or I don't know that we really had to plant it. It probably planted itself. I didn't want the pilot coming down this runway looking at a pile of rocks in front of him. Now, would it make him any safer? Absolutely not. That wouldn't, maybe if it was just barely stopping, it would have saved him. But if he had any speed at all, he was going to go right over that grass as much as if it wasn't there. And he would have had the same fatalities as if it hadn't been there. Yeah, one of the things you notice this was an interesting game. Notice we actually built this turnaround. How often have you seen a single runway like this, which is wide enough for a plane to turn around, that allows you to charge, and FAA paid for it, to pave this extra area? And this isn't cheap. This stuff is costing a lot of dollars a square foot. We convinced them that, again, safety is important. By having to pull out here, hold your nose wheel, and yes, let's face it, the wheel does sometimes seem to slip over here, but technically they can't go over that line, and they generally don't. Turn around and come back. You're going to be way up here by the time you stop. We gave them the room to swing out and come back, and they knew they could go with this, and they knew they could sneak out, because this also was, shall we say, I over-designed it for a shoulder. It was grossly over-designed. Wouldn't take the 1.5 million pound plane, but it sure would take a 787. And the FAA went along with my over-designs for those reasons. They knew it. And I really wanted them to let us pave it so they could come out here and gain the 200 feet. FAA never went along with that, but I think they should. This is Guam, where I spent a lot of time. It was a naval facility. There were 2 runways close together that could be used and were. The old terminal was in here. The Pan Am plane had to kind of pull in and be pushed out, if I remember right, or backed out, I forget what. I know it was a real problem. A local architect had finally worked with the Navy to plan a new terminal. The old terminal was over here. The first gates of the new terminal were here, and the architect designed those. Our company got the job to go on, and so essentially this is my design. We had no architect available. I just laid out a straight building you could walk through, an entrance building over here for arrivals, departures. This has been expanded on for cargo and other things. Initially, it was just going to go to here, or we never really decided where it was going to go. There was a hill up this way that actually the hill was started about here. And so every project on the island that needed material, it was good construction material, would just keep chopping into the hill. So we got the hill chopped back way up into here, and we were able to extend out to here. And because nobody needed this side, I was able to build back on this backside. So all these aprons and loading bridges were all my designs at the time. I did some rework on the runway, but not an awful lot. But it was a real interesting experience to be able to do it and have the enjoyment of it. My other jobs were Saipan, Yap, Palau, Philippines. Just go quick. The first major airport was Saipan. This was a World War II bomber, B-29 bomber field. 2 planes were taken off simultaneously and landing simultaneously on these 2 runways. This whole area, if you see old pictures, was packed with B-29s, nose to nose. I mean, it was just unbelievable how many planes were on that island. We decided to use the outboard runway here. We cleared a lot more than we needed to, and we're able to. We saved a couple of historic buildings in here that initially were going to get torn down. They were Japanese buildings, but they become museum pieces now, thank goodness. Again, I got major design. We had a local architect who, like everyone else, was overworked. And we had zero budget practically to build the terminal. He designed, and I won't say it was a tin can, but it wasn't much better. We had a young architect who had just come on with the company who wanted to do something better. And I spent a couple of weekends and designed these roofs with the terminal, with the sloping roofs and everything else, which you'll notice I like sloping roofs. And that's what we ended up building, and they have become really good. This is another picture. And again, you've got to imagine this whole area. They never paved it, but there was strong, heavy coral. It was just packed with B-29s, solid. Going on down the Yap Islands, I don't have any real pictures of the airport except a couple that are coming up. Spent many days in a Yappies huts like this, meeting with local people. Literally, the planning here had to be done on the island. There's no way I could plan that anywhere else in the world. And I was able to plan a way we could save the old airport or could move to a new airport. A different company got the job to build it and found a better site, which I give them credit for, because we had looked at that site when I was looking there, and there were graves there. And how he convinced them to move the graves, I don't know. All I know is that when I was there was absolutely no way I was ever going to move even a single grave. This is the terminal building. A little bit of, what they did, the concrete apron. I got to rebuild that. This is the terminal, which again, I had no real part. Next airport was Babelthaup. This is what I was given when I flew down probably around 1973 with this in my hand to do something for the Babelthaup Kosrae Airport. This was the runway. It was loose gravel. I mean, you could reach down and pick the rocks up. It was in such bad condition. This, to the best of my knowledge, was the old terminal building down in the valley, right off the edge of the runway. The plane landed, parked here. That's where it unloaded it. You walked up the hill. Somehow they rolled your baggage up the hill and anything else and everything down and took off. This is what we ended up building, 7,200 feet, I think, runway. What I did is, again, you got to realize that this runway started here, went downhill way too much, came back up and ended up with a steep, almost a cliff off this end of it. The best I could find, then there was a big hill right back here that we could shave back, but we weren't going to go way back in this hill. What I did find was a little ridge across the valley. This was a valley, but this was a ridge that we could use for the taxiway. This was a hill. We could put a terminal in here and a parking lot in here, and that's exactly what we built. This is the terminal that I suggested. The architect had the job, designed this terminal. I worked with him on this apron, on this taxiway on the side, on my own personally, just to help him get through it. And again, I worked with him on this because it was one of these personal things. I wanted to see that airport built. I really liked the island, felt very much in love with it. And later on, the island itself built this terminal and parking lot. This is another picture on the apron itself. This is us. We in around 20,345. We rebuilt this whole runway, an asphalt runway, and grooved it. And this is a picture of us on the final walkout, probably around 2006, 7, 8, somewhere in there, maybe 9, when our final walk down there. But we completely rebuilt and actually filled in and leveled in the middle a little bit to get it. Clark Air Base, the airfield was a civilian airfield. They wanted a new runway. The old runway was in horribly bad shape, and they just couldn't close it enough to they couldn't close it to repair it for the needs it had. So we designed and built a whole new concrete runway for them, left the old runway where it was, built all new access aprons, cross taxiways, bypass. This was the first end-around taxiway, and we designed it so that all but the big C-5A aircraft could fly through here and would be below the aircraft using that runway. So I actually designed one of the first end-around taxiways in the world, which are now being designed a lot more. Another job that I had was Taipei, Taiwan. Our company got the job to design it, and I think, am I right, Sam Chang, I think, was the architect on this. So he designed the terminal. I gave him the layouts of the gates. This was the initial runway. This, I think, was the second taxi, which I think may have been the one, or it may have been this one, where that pilot took off on it instead of going to the correct taxiway and ended up crashing into equipment because the runway was lit at night while it was under construction. And they hadn't turned off the lights, and he misunderstood the lights, pulled out on it, and crashed. One of the things I did, and I will mention that because I think that's important, if you ever do work on a taxiway or a runway that is going to have it closed at night, you will, not only you will personally see that it's done, disconnect the wires to the lighting system on that runway and taxiway. You will have them outside the cabinet, hanging out there. And had they done that, the pilot wouldn't obviously have been able, no matter if the guy turned the switch on and off, the lights would not have worked. But I had learned early on, and probably even at Honolulu, that when you close a runway and it is not going to be used at night, you disconnect the switches. And I know we did it at Honolulu at the time. At any rate, I don't know what else there is.
Frank, it was a pleasure to work with you out in Micronesia. In fact, Ed Al-Thani was the architect at the Keahole Airport. Yeah. And it was it still said, Keahole is an airport with a wonderful runway and no terminal. And Maui is an airport with a wonderful terminal and no runway.
Yeah.
It was good. It was good to see the work that you had done in Chuuk. I was gone by the time that new airfield got put in. My days were all on the crust coral, short takeoff and landing.
Yeah.
We had a pilot once with Air Micronesia. Everybody called him Smiling Jack. He wore a yellow scarf around his neck. And I asked him once, because takeoff, touch and goes to check whether you really wanted to make that landing were not uncommon. And I asked you, I said, aren't you concerned? Are you ever fearful that, this isn't going to work? And he said, no, actually, you're probably safer here than you would be with an instrumented landing at a major airport in the mainland United States, because here that pilot is 100% active in control of that plane.
Yeah, that's a good point. Out there, well, the chief pilot for Air Micronesia, Continental Air knew me personally through the work I was doing. He had me jump seat several times. And like you say, these guys aren't just landing a plane while they're talking about lunch. Mm-hmm. They are landing a plane. Number two, if you go out on those runways, well, it's hard to see this. If you go out on this runway, here's your aiming point, the 1,000-foot bar. You will be surprised to see any touchdown more than 200 feet in front of that or 300 to 400 feet past that. Mm. They don't miss that point. Mm-hmm. they hit that point because they're intent on it. I know when I sat in the cockpit on this landing, it was intense. I mean, there's nothing really difficult about it. It's just that you don't have any safety. I mean, that's just this safety factor, 200 feet, period. Oh,
Frank, leave that picture up. You see the mountain just to the right of the airfield. I heard a story that required a light by FAA standards because of its proximity to the runway. But that was a sacred mountain. And for a period of time, there was an impasse when the rest of the work was nearing completion, that the people would not let a light be put up there. And the resolution was eventually, working with Erhard Otten, who was first governor of Truk, was to have a big ceremony and bless the sacred light, which was then placed on the sacred mountain.
Yeah. Yes, that was.
I thought that was very creative.
Was interesting because again, FAA would have allowed it. What it would have probably done is they probably would have set the minimums higher, which means you might add more. I've made 2 go-arounds on this one. 2 out of the, I probably landed on this thing 40 or 50 times, but twice we've gone around. And again, you know, some of the people on me, well, it's just perfectly normal and they're ready for it. It's not like, what was the guy that flew the plane into the Everglades? They're making a landing in a perfectly clear airport with the ILS, the lights, the blah, blah, blah. And they're talking about some stupid thing that has nothing to do with flying or anything. And they're not even looking out the window and they literally flew the plane in the Everglades. I forget when it was, but it's the sort of thing that doesn't happen out here.
Hey, Frank, great presentation. Thank you. I, like Bill Bonnet, I spent a lot of time in Guam and Palau, whatnot. But I remember one time flying back to Honolulu from Guam, sitting next to a young lady, and she was just totally amped up. She was a pilot for Continental Airline who took a what do you call it, a temporary assignment on Air Micronesia. We all called it Air Maybe. And she was so pumped up, she was going back to Houston. Her husband was a pilot. And if he didn't agree, she didn't care. She was coming back because she told me with a very surprised face, you actually fly the airplane out there.
Yeah, you do fly. I mean, it's real flying. And they like almost every pilot I met and our crew liked the work they were doing out there. It was difficult work. It is. And you got, of course, you got the crabs, the chickens, the lobsters, everything else running around in the airplane. I don't know if they finally stopped it, but I wouldn't be surprised. But if someday the chicken doesn't walk down the aisle again.
Frank, we got one last question from Mac.
Well, it's a comment. and I had landed there when it was a coral runway. And the first pass, the plane didn't land. It was to let the people know that the plane was going to land, because it wasn't a great schedule that Continental had. So that people would have their clothes out on the runway drying them. and that gave them a chance to get them before the jets.
That could have been this runway was a nightmare early on, and to their credit, we worked a lot with these people. To their credit, they finally really accepted it. One of the problems is, this is great fishing over here. This is really great fishing. They would just walk across the runway, plane or no plane. I mean, the plane would land and he'd still be turning around and they'd be walking across the runway already. But we finally were able to get them to agree to the fence. And that was a long fight. FAA let us go without a fence for quite a while, and then build a fence around the end. And there's my 2-foot fence. You can't see that, but there actually is a fence around this whole blankety blank thing all the way. It's low, and meets it.
Frank, I think some of these islands out there in the Pacific should put up a statue of you. And they don't realize what your contributions have been. This is a certificate for you. You can see that.
Yep. Thank you.
It's a virtual one since you're in Las Vegas, but we do still pass these out if you actually attend in person.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank.
Officially, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming, and see you on the 21st of July.
Engineers and architects of Hawaii welcome your comments on this program and any of our recent programs. We encourage your direct participation in this community outreach. So please email us your comments and ideas at eahawaii@gmail.com.